Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Matt. Sorry we're a couple minutes late. Had a little bit of technical difficulties. It's all good though. Um, Tonight is more of like a special night, I guess you can say. I decided to want to tackle this one in more of a one-on-one fashion, um, because when it comes to white privilege, it's a very sensitive topic for obvious reasons. Either if you are black, it's one of those things where we're like, hey, you have your white privilege. If you're white, it's like, what do you mean? I don't have any privilege. Or it can mean, yes, I do have privilege, or it can be something in between. Um, this topic has come up in some of my previous conversations in small spurts. And I realized, you know what, maybe we need to dedicate some time to it. And then this will not be the last conversation on white privilege at all. I would say this is just the first of maybe many. I don't know. I mean, Jason and I are not going to solve, social justice, race issues, and culture differences in this call at all. Maybe his beard will be able to pull it off. I'm not sure, but uh, anyway, I just wanted to, make sure that, we understand this is a safe, civil conversation. Jason and I don't always agree on everything. I've known Jason for years, but we have always found a way to get to some type of understanding. Even if we didn't fully agree, I found that we can talk about almost anything. We just at least understand it or walk away with something different that we didn't think of before. So I'm going to check real quick, see how people are getting on right now, and then also try to see if we are, as people are getting on, just make sure that we are live and people can see what's up. Yep, I see it. Great. So white privilege. So we're going to take this a little bit different. This is a little bit more structured. So actually, Jason, do me a favor, introduce yourself real quick, where you're from and where you live, and then I'll jump into the white privilege topic.
Yeah. So Jason Parrott, like I said, we've known each other for years. 11 years, 12?
Something like that. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, about 11 years.
Currently reside in Phoenix area. I've bounced around all over. I've lived all over the place. So Boston, Colorado, Seattle, I've lived all over the place. So I've bounced around and been quite a few different areas. So definitely got lots of different experiences with, different areas and how things are a little bit different from regional locations and whatnot, right? So
yeah. So what's important about this topic, I think, for both of us is, we come from two different backgrounds. Obviously, we look different, right? And our backgrounds are always going to be, something that drives a lot of our decisions going forward. And as we get to meet new people and have new experiences, we learn from them. This topic of white privilege is just sensitive. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Jay. Like, I don't know if there's a way to get around it. At least right now in the near future, but I think it's important for us to just tackle the conversation, and hopefully people understand, have the conversations with people who don't look like you as well, not just those who are agreeable. So that way you can ensure that you're getting a better perspective of how they may feel about it. And that way together, maybe you guys can help solve what the problems are. So for tonight, I'm going to actually, look at two definitions, right? So one is the word privilege and the other is white privilege. And then I would love for Jason to kind of, chime in on his thoughts in regards to, or really his own personal experience, like, on white privilege. So real quick, I'll just use the Wikipedia definition of white privilege. White privilege is the socialite privilege that benefits white people over non-white people in some societies, particularly if they are otherwise under the same social, political, or economic circumstances. With roots in European colonialism, the Atlantic slave trade, and the growth of the Second British Empire after 1783, white privilege has developed in circumstances that have broadly sought to protect white racial privileges, various national citizenships, and other rights or special benefits. So that is a really thick definition there. And then the word privilege itself is a special right or advantage or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group of people. Um, so yeah, and then there's a verb. I think this is important. Grant a privilege or privileges to, from a verb, from an action standpoint. So Jay, like when it comes to white privilege, I know some of it, but let's just talk to everybody. What do you think? I mean, what is it, and how has it been impacting you? What are your thoughts on it?
Sure, yeah. So I'll say first of all, does it exist? Yes. My opinion, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, I get hung up on the term privilege because to me, and I know you read the definition, but to me, when I think of privilege, I think of something that someone has earned, right? Like, we're dads, right? So our kids earn privileges, for
Right.
example, like play video games or play basketball, whatever the case may be. I think of privilege, I think of something that someone does something to earn, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I kind of get hung up on that term, privilege, because I'm white, right? And I didn't do anything to earn or deserve. I didn't ask for this privilege, you know what I mean? It's not something that I wanted or that I sought out, right? So I think I kind of just get hung up on that label, privilege. So, but I'm not denouncing it, saying no way it doesn't exist. It definitely exists. And for me, I think different contexts can kind of make it vary a little bit, right? But from my perspective, it absolutely exists. I think it would be helpful, at least from my perspective. I'm not speaking on behalf of everyone, but to have maybe a more friendly label to it. You know what I'm saying? To kind of make it resonate a little bit better and be something that I think people could maybe understand a bit better.
Do you think like I appreciate you sharing that? Like, do you feel like when you say friendly, it's funny because depending on where you're at, right? Like, this is so hilarious. I mean, you and I have certain ticks that we kind of know. Like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be friendly about it, but I understand why. Like, it's more of a like, hey, you're trying to basically, based on what you just said, you're trying to tell me, this red carpet was rolled out to me, but like, that's how I take it. Did you come up with a better way, I guess, of saying it? Because the terminology is tough, right? So for me specifically, the label white privilege, I know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
The words itself is difficult for me to just blurt it out, but it's what we have right now, and that's what we're using. But I think both of us would agree it would be foolish to not think that it actually exists.
Sure.
I know that there are people who are trying to find ways of changing the label, like maybe white advantages is another
Mm-hmm.
one, but it is a reality, right? I mean, between you and I, we both know, and there's been times we've walked, let's take corporate America, for example. I think there's what may be an advantage of like maybe comfortability, right? Corporate America, you and I, when we work together, if we're in a conference room and we're working on some type of engagement, 9 times out of 10, I was the only black guy in the room, right?
Yep.
Um, that was, that's a privilege of yours to have, to be comfortable with people.
That's right.
Even if they were like on the opposite side of the table or represent something different, that was a privilege for you. Does that make sense, bro? Like,
Yep.
is that fair?
Absolutely.
Is that
It
fair
is.
for me to label? Is that fair for me to tell you that that's a privilege?
It is absolutely fair, and it absolutely exists.
Mm-hmm.
But I think um, one of the things that I see a lot of, again, speaking from my own opinion and
Mm-hmm.
perspective, is I think I see a lot of white people that go along with it, and I don't think they fully understand it, and then B, I feel like a lot of white people go along with it because they feel socially pressured to saying, "Oh yeah, we got to stop," white privilege. And I'm not saying that's right, but I think there's a lot of these pressures that kind of artificially make people just go along with the punches without fully understanding it. Because it does exist. It exists in corporate America. It exists with law enforcement, right? It exists in a lot of everyday activities, even going to a restaurant, you know what I mean? Um, Everything that we do, there are advantages. We're going to use your term, advantages, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
So
those,
like, so what happens? And by the way, I'm looking down. If anyone was watching, note, I'm looking down my phone, reading comments. We had a couple comments. I mean, quick. I guess this topic is. I mean,
I figured,
this topic is a pretty hot topic. So, and Stephen, thanks for commenting. We'll definitely cover what you stated on here. So, like, it's so hard, right? Because I don't ever want to take away effort from any human being, right?
mm-hmm.
No matter what you put in. One of the things I think, like you said earlier, right? Like, hey, there's this quick, or not earlier, but just what you just recently said, there's like this quick response, like, we got to get rid of white privilege. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's tough, right? Are there white people who are saying it out of fear and not really actually understanding? Is that what you're trying to tell me? Like understanding what it is? Because it's like there's some people who, I'm not saying that I wouldn't want somebody's what's the word? Pity is the wrong word. Empathy. Support. Yeah, perfect. Support. But is it genuine, right? And I think, is that what you're concerned with? Like, is it genuine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, correct. I feel like it might just be it's socially more accepted to be supportive of it than it is for you to state your true feelings about it. You know, there could be some people that are like, no, it's bullshit, right? And they're entitled to that opinion. I may not agree with it, but I feel like the social pressures, you know, social media has such an influence on people. And so I feel like people kind of want to go with the flow and they don't want to be disruptive, so to speak. And
let me ask you a question. How do we reconcile history, right? Sorry about the lights, guys. There's also like a storm coming through here, but how do we reconcile history, right? When, you know, for now, I'm going to speak now. This is an interesting position that we're in, right? I'm definitely African American, no questions asked. But I'm also first generation American. My parents came here in the late 70s. So I'm benefiting from the civil rights movement. Like, I personally benefit from that. I benefit from the laws that have been written to make it available for people of my skin tone to be able to, you know, reap the rewards of this nation. But historically, right? So as a Black man, historically, there are things that have been put in place from the inception of this nation. Let's say, you know, we can go back to slavery before we got to when we became an established nation in 1776 to even, you know, the end of slavery, you know, 1865, the final place actually in Texas that finally found out, hey, where it's over. I'm just saying these points, but there's always been and I say this respectfully, there's always been a white dominant perspective of that. And so when you think about the amount of money that was owned in the economics and the land and so on and so forth, that's been just pretty much dominated by the white person, right? And then you pass that knowledge down for years and years and years and generations. Is that not within itself a privilege, or you know what I'm saying? Like, because that to me is what I think a lot of the argument is. It's like, and I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, man. Like, I don't know.
No, it does. I think to your point, and you said the word knowledge, I'm going to say influence, right? Over the periods of time, there's been this overarching influence, right, from back in history. And I think to your point, I think that influence just kind of continues, right? It's just been there. And it's not necessarily that people, or white people for that matter, are pushing it, but I think it just continues to exist, right? And until something disruptive, in my opinion, is going to happen, then it's going to unfortunately continue to exist, which I know that's part of what we try to do these days is try to be disruptive. That way we can try to wake people up to it, or at least try to raise awareness, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And get people to start thinking differently, right?
Do you feel, let me ask you a question. Can I challenge you real quick as a white guy?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel, not threatened, but like, has it pissed you off when someone just pointed at you and said, it's because of your white privilege? Or like somebody who looks like you, right? Like, do you feel defensive of other white people or the white man? I don't know how to really say it. Like, this is so controversial. Like, I'm trying to be sensitive, but I'm happy I'm comfortable with you to ask this question. Like, as a white dude, do you feel like standing up for all of white Americans, like, this is not just a privilege of mine, like, or do you want to explain it on behalf of white folks, on behalf of black, like, I don't know. You tell me, like, how has it made you feel?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the context is how I'm going to start my answer, right? So corporate America, right? And I know you and I have talked about this before, right?
Yeah.
So it pisses me off when people kind of play that, well, you're white, that's how you got to where you're at.
Okay.
Because I grinded hard to get where I'm at, right?
Right.
At least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I don't feel as though I was given any handouts. Now, does that mean that there was a process that maybe I wasn't privy to? Maybe I was up for a job or role that maybe behind the scenes there was a person of color that was also considered? I have no idea, right?
Right.
But through my lens, I'm like, hey, I grinded. Nobody handed me this. You know what I mean? So I think it depends on the context.
You don't like it being late, like just thrown out there for everything.
Correct. I don't like it just to be a blanket kind of catch-all term of, well, that's okay because you got white privilege, right? But like, for example, when I was younger, driving fast, right? You get your license and you're
right.
Late teens, early 20s, you drive fast. I definitely can say that, getting pulled over obviously is a different experience. And I don't need to think about, hey, put the hands on 10 and 2 and.
Oh yeah, we're strict with that 10 and 2. I mean, for
sure.
us, I'm like male or female, it doesn't matter.
That's right. And I've never had to think about that. And I've been pulled over plenty of times. And yes, there's been opportunities where I didn't get a ticket. There's some where I did get a ticket. So, that's just an example. I've seen things like that where, hey, I've never had to think about that, right? But I have kind of a little bit of a story that is reverse a little bit, right? And I know you and I have kind of touched a little bit, but so, and if I'm jumping the gun, you want me to do this later, I can.
No, go ahead. I mean, this is good.
Okay, so
for those watching, we will address the comments and questions and stuff like that. That's typically going to be around between 7:30 and 7:35.
Yeah. So I had a pretty decent track career when I was younger. And when I first started track, 7th grade, I'm not going to say where I lived. I'll try to kind of protect a little bit. But when I first started my track, I wasn't very good, right? They put me in sprints and everything. And so they were just trying to put me in different events to kind of see where it stuck. And I kind of held my own, but I wasn't good. I wasn't winning anything. I wasn't competing for winning anything, right? So I'll never forget, I think it was after one of our first couple of meets or whatever, you go away meets and you come off the bus and my mom picked me up. And I got off the bus and I didn't think anything of it, but I got in the car and my mom's like, I didn't realize you were the only white kid on the bus. And I didn't even think of it. I'm like, she's right, right? I never thought of it because from a social perspective, I didn't get necessarily treated differently. No one was teasing me or anything, or no one left me out. But there was, like, even the coaches, right, were black. And so it made me have to grind a little bit harder to show up in terms of the team and prove, hey, man, like, I'm here and I can contribute as well. It took a little while before they kind of found an event for me
right.
that was a good fit. But, I mean, I was the only white kid on the team, and I don't remember how many. There was a decent amount, and like I said, socially, it was fine and it was normal. But from a contributing to that team, I really had to kind of grind a little bit more to show the coaches, like, hey, I'm not just some dude that's going to go away, right? I'm here.
Right.
And
yeah.
I think that's relevant to kind of, I know you and I have talked about some of the scenarios that at least from a corporate America perspective, again,
Right.
I'm kind of keeping that context, right?
Yeah.
That you've had to face, right? And I'm speaking to you, not all black people, right?
Right. Not all black people, yeah.
And I know that it's at least relevant. Now, let me just be clear here before I get beat up in the comments. I'm not suggesting that there's the opposite of white privilege. That's not what I'm suggesting.
Right.
I'm just saying that there are scenarios that can be ironic, I guess.
I personally wouldn't even discount the scenarios you're bringing up just because, like, black people have it harder than white people in this regard. So, like, that's your scenario is legit, right? So that's fine. I think what, as a black man, part of the, like, as in the corporate America space, we talk about that. I think it's just happens in so many different spaces, right? So, like, we got the cars, we got corporate America, we got, maybe walking in the mall, we got, like, there's different scenarios, like, as women, right? And I'm not a woman, and this call does not have a woman on it, and that was sort of intentional. We're going to cover that in another white privilege conversation. But it was, so I'm not going to speak for all women or any woman, but as a black woman, the things that they had to endure, like I was thinking about earlier about how I was talking to a friend earlier about how if you were probably 35 or 40 plus and you were a little girl, you had a white doll, right? And so there's just so many different scenarios. So your tracking example is not, it's not invalid at all. It's just, some will probably hear that and say, oh, well, that's only one time or one space,
Sure.
Sure. And I will say for me, it's like, it's tough. You're right. I mean, I guess if I was a dude on track and I'm running with a whole bunch of black dudes and you show up, it's kind of like, is what it is. I'll tell you, for me, I felt like I had to work harder in corporate America because I was one of the only few. And I got there and I was like, I'm representing every black man who ever shows up in the office for the next X amount of years. You know what I'm saying? Just like you probably felt you represent every white dude on a track team, even though you were the only one. Is that a fair statement? I don't know.
100%. And I think when I finally found an event and I was good at it, it was kind of like that moment of, yes, I did it. You know what I mean? Like I proved to them, like, hey, I belong here too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at the comments here. Let me see. This is, look, man, I think you are a good dude. I think you move on. This is why I get frustrated. Oh, okay. I think that's Anna sharing about the track story, I'm assuming.
Oh, okay.
Like comment just, well, yeah, because it is like why people get frustrated. Because sometimes I think if that's what Anna's saying, I think sometimes when they hear stories like that, and I know what you mean, it's like, are you trying to now say that's the same? Which I don't think so, but.
No, not even close. What I'm trying to do is kind of show different scenarios. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to water it down. I'm not trying to say like, yeah, I see how that came off now.
Yeah. No, I understand, but I know where you're coming from. And this is why, like, just for those who are watching, part of the reason why this is a sensitive topic, especially if you're a white guy, not because we can't sit here and have the conversations with whoever, but like there's almost no, and this is why I created Civil Conversation. I think it's important for everybody to understand. This isn't just about let's get black people, us people to express anger and frustrations and hurt, but also let's hear out the other side, because at the end of the day, we need to figure this stuff out. And this puts someone like Jason in a tough position because in some cases you don't know what to say, right?
That's right.
Yep. We just never know exactly what to say. But I don't think that story was a bad story, but it is always something easy. Oh, let's just pick on this story. But I don't think that's a bad story at all. But it is something I think some people, when they immediately respond with, this is my track story versus the birth story, right? So for me, I'm saying, well, from birth For you, it's like, well, this is a moment in time. For me, it was
this one time. Yeah.
yeah. Hold on a second. Let me see. History experiences helps with compassion. That's what Christy just said. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Chrissy and Anna, for those comments. Star as well. Shout out to the wifey for her comment.
I think let me say one thing.
Ahead. Please go ahead.
I think whoever you said it was commented. I think that's probably kind of why I said my story was that I get it, right? Even though I'm not saying I understand what you feel.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I understand what it means, and I acknowledge it, and I do think it exists. I'm just not a fan of the term privilege. That's my summary.
And honestly, I struggle with it because I feel like the true meaning of what's going on gets lost in the word privilege, because it can get quickly dismissed by someone who is white, who hears the word privilege and think, I'm not listening to that, because it's deeper than that. It's much deeper than that. It's privilege is the title, but what it means, I believe in. Like what it's supposed to represent, I do believe that there are advantages that have been created intentionally or unintentionally by who dominated this nation from an economical standpoint for hundreds of years, who represented a color which happens to be white.
Yes.
And so that's just the situation that we're in. And it's not great. I'm not saying it's great, but if we don't talk about it, like even right now, like you put yourself in a position to have this conversation. It's hard. We need more people to have this conversation, not be defensive about it. Do you find that, like, I want to touch on something you said earlier, I think that was critical. You said people running and saying, let's get rid of white privilege, and you're unsure how genuine they are, right? You kind of that to me scares me a little bit too. Not because I don't think it's I'm not saying everyone who says it is not genuine, because that wouldn't be fair either. But like, for those who do feel the social pressure to say, let's get rid of it, how does that impact us in the long run if they really didn't mean it?
Right.
No. Are they willing to have the conversation behind the statement?
Correct. And I think that's part of the problem, and why some of these challenges are such a problem, because if people are not going to be fully committed to it, then it's just lip service, right? And we don't necessarily need lip service. Now, I agree with you that it's important for us to have these civil conversations,
right,
and hear both sides of the story, but there needs to be more than just lip service. There needs to be people truly understanding and acknowledging, in order for there to actually be any substantial change that's going to make any difference, right, or impact.
Right.
And I get you and I aren't going to fix it together here right now.
No.
But there does need to be more than just people saying, yeah, white privilege sucks, let's wipe it out, right? That's just a statement anyone can make.
And you can't really wipe out white privilege. So for those who like to give my full thought, not full, but just a more broader thought on white privilege, for me, even the term, well, let's say advantage, white stuff, I don't know what you want to call it. Well, the white stuff sounds very illegal, but there is a level of, like, we got to remember this was built on economics, right? And I know that there's a lot of shame that comes from, there's like white guilt, they call it now. That's another term. Shame of the ancestors who enslaved people that look like me. And the reason why I'm very clear with saying people who look like me, because my ancestors, from what I know, were not here. So that's very important. And I'll address that in another video in the future. But people who look like me, ancestors, a couple hundred years ago, through slavery and then through Jim Crow and so on and so forth, the economics is the bigger aspect of this that I think, not bigger, it's a critical aspect of this that we need to take into consideration. That's why it's not easy to just wipe out white people. We call it, for us, we call it old money. I don't know if you ever heard that term before, Jason, but we call it old money, or we got that long money, right, or whatever. That's what we kind of call it. And that's what y'all have. And when I say y'all, it's like you, like as a white dude, I'm kind of like, yo, when we see you, we're like, you got the long money. Like I did this experiment with some friends like a year or two ago. I said, close your eyes, imagine a wealthy dude What color is he? We all have been programmed for it being a white guy. That's why white privilege is so personal to us. Like, it's a hurtful statement. Sorry to like go long, but am I making some sense, bro? Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 What do you think about what I just said? I know I said a lot. I just had to get that out because I'm just thinking through this, you know?
No, I think it's valid. But then again, then you kind of turn it back, and I look at it and I'm like, well, I don't have any old long money either. So I'm like, where's this white dude that's got this old long money? Because I'm like, I want to be that guy.
Yeah.
But no,
yeah.
seriously, I understand what you're saying, and I think you kind of touched on it, right? We're programmed, right? And I think we need to understand why and how and where that programming starts, right? Because we see this and hear this all the time of kids aren't born racist and kids aren't born with white privilege, so to speak,
Yeah.
but it just kind of happens, right? And it happens from parenting in the home, it happens in schools and
Yeah.
the social interactions at school and things like that. And it's not something that, again, we're going to unravel every aspect of that here, but I think programmed is the right term, right? Is somewhere along the way we're getting programmed into this kind of mindset or influence that, like you said, you close your eyes and you picture a rich, powerful dude. What color is he? Yeah, I bet you 9 out of 10 people are probably going to say white.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And that sucks.
Yeah, it does. And I think, like, the situation with race in this nation being so tied to economics, which then also bridges into knowledge and experience. And then what are you passing down, right? When, and I hate to say it like this, but 55 years ago, really, if even less than that, we as African Americans got all of our rights. So there are people alive right now, that knows what it's like to not have all their rights. And when you think about access to money and education and so on and so forth, for how long it's taken to kind of get there, we had the big college boom in like the late 80s, like the 70s and 80s amongst African Americans, especially the HBCUs, just go up, right? Watch A Different World, boom, all these people start registering. And we're getting in there, right? We're getting in there to try to get to the economics, but it's just, we're so far behind in the race, which is the analogy earlier, right? We're just trying to say, I think, as a people, and it's not to say, speaking for myself, I'm thankful for where I'm at and where God has blessed me. And I want to do more and want to be more for my kids and also for other African Americans, however way that looks. But as a whole, it's just, you're right. You're not some like rich white dude who just has money falling in your lap, just like I'm not. We both had to work. The obstacles may have been less for you than they were for me.
Right.
And then
and I think to kind of use my track story as a bit of an analogy, it's as if in life, white people are getting a head start in the race. And I think even in some instances, not only are we getting a head start, but like you guys get like one arm tied behind your back. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's frustrating to see and be a part of, and it sucks, right? I mean, I'm drawing a blank on what I'm trying to say here, but
no, you're fine.
Again, it's one of those things where I feel like we got a head start in the race, right? Using that analogy, but
right.
I didn't ask for it, and that's kind of where that privilege term kind of, is the trouble spot for me. But again, I do absolutely acknowledge that it exists, and it exists in a lot of different aspects for sure.
I think what you just said about the head start is there. You know, how do we, like you just said, the Head Start. The fact that you, like, I'm not gonna lie, the fact that you just said that really makes me smile on the inside, because that's, it's not all, I think, like, and again, I don't speak for all Black people. I'm not saying that's all Black people are trying to say, but that's a really, really important statement you just made. Like, you had a head start. You may not have been born with a silver spoon in your mouth, but your likeness has been.
Right. Yep.
And that's important. Just like on the flip side, for me, I may not have been born, you know, with, you know, I don't know, no education, like the access to rich money, but my likeness, you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm saying it the right way. I think it's important that, one, we can't assume every white person is rich. But I think Mike Welker said something I thought that was really good. He said, white privilege is basically not being held back in its simplest form. No one is giving white people any special opportunities. I agree with Mike in regards to just the words he said. The only difference that I would actually kind of challenge, I would say, would be because of the economic hold that is there, you're going to give a shot and you're going to look out for your kids, your kids, or your cousins, your this. Does that make sense? Because I'm going to do that. Like, let's be real for a second. I'm going to do that. And so I feel where Mike's going, but I also think, like, there's a little bit of nuance there, you know?
Sure.
I'm going to go to the comments. There was a question, and I lost it, unfortunately. It was from Stephen Herman. He mentioned it earlier. Stephen, if you can retype your question from way earlier, that would be super helpful. If you can hear me on here, that would be great. Do you think, Jason, while waiting for Stephen to try to throw that question back out there, do you think that, how do you feel, do you care or have, care is a strong word, do you feel responsible to help educate other white people because of your relationship with someone like me?
Yes, 100%. Because I think education, this is my opinion, I think education is the best tool that we all have, not just white people, but especially white people. I think education is the biggest impact that we can have, not just with our own people, right, to your point, family, but just people we come across in our daily lives, right? And I know I mentioned in the comments a couple sessions back, just kind of, I don't know that racism always comes from a place of malice. Sometimes it does. I'm not saying that it doesn't always, but I think sometimes people just need to kind of be educated because their upbringing programmed, right? This is the term that you used that I liked. Their upbringing programmed them this way, and they're completely unaware that it's unacceptable, right? And so I think a lot of times educating, hey man, that's not right. You can't say that, or you can't treat other people that way. I think educating people of, man, that you're out of line.
Yeah.
You know, does that mean it's going to change that person's behavior? Not necessarily, but at least I feel good knowing, hey man, I called you out. Like, you know, you can't act like that, or you can't treat people that way, I think is important, because I can't change all things everywhere, and I'm not going to fix the world overnight. But even if I can educate one person, then it at least helps me feel like I'm part of the good fight, the cause, right? That's my opinion.
I think that all makes the whole sense. And I don't know if it's Stephen or Stefan, and I apologize. I'm really big on trying to pronounce people's names appropriately, especially with one that's as complicated as mine. But Stefan retyped this question. This is a hard one to answer, in my opinion. But my question is, this is what he says. My question was basically that if white folks get all the privilege, how can we explain being deselected for educational and special programs based solely on their race?
So this is
Sensitive as all get out. Like,
Yeah,
so
I'll
for
tell
those
you.
who wondering why I only had him and I on this one for now. um, we're very careful in the words we choose. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm gonna toe the line cautiously here as I answer this. So, and Matt, you and I have talked about this. So, I think depending on the context, the term white privilege may not always be present.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying I think in certain contexts, it could be a little bit different. And so we'll pluck out education from Stefan's question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So education, when you go to get financial aid and things like that for college applications, right? Sometimes when you check the box for, let's say, Hispanic, right? It opens a lot of different doors than if you just say, hey, I'm a white dude, right? If you're Native American and you check a box, you get access to different amounts of things or different
Right.
programs that other people aren't. Same goes for if you check, African American. So there are absolutely there are some advantages in some scenarios for being a person of color. I'll say person of color because it's different, right?
Right.
But that does not take away, and I'm kind of going back to my analogy of my race analogy of we still kind of got that head start.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
And even though there may be some check boxes along the way that may give you a little benefit along the way, I still feel like white people have that head start in the race, and those don't make up that head start. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And thanks for taking it for answering that very carefully too, because that's such a hard question to answer. Stefan, thank you for asking that question. I'll give my answer. I think first off, Jason, I think everything you said makes a lot of sense, especially because it's such a difficult question to answer. I think it goes back to context, kind of like what Jason said. Like, what's the scenario where this lies, right? When you have initiatives over the last 45, 50 years, 60 years to ensure that other races can get a shot at the economical advantages of the capitalistic nation we live in, those systems are kind of required to help raise those other races to have access.
I agree.
And I'm trying to be very careful when I say this as well. This nation is dealing with the consequences of how it was created 300 years ago, 300 years ago, no matter what the race is. But the consequences vary according to its race. So right now, for white people, some of those consequences may be you're not getting the same shot at something that a Hispanic or African American, Native American can get based on the race, so that way they can raise the quota or the percentages of who has access to it, because you as a white person white people have dominated so much of that for so long. It's why we have more black billionaires today, or why we have more rich Asians or more rich Indians or whatever you may want to call it today versus, 70 years ago, 80 years ago. It's so hard to, Stefan, I'm not saying that makes it any better. I'm not saying that it's not, I'm not trying to devalue the white privilege statement in that topic, but I mean, it's a fair question, but it's part of why maybe. And I don't know if anyone's made a comment in regards to that. Would you say, let me see, no one's made a comment. But did that make sense, Jason, what I said so far?
It does. And I was going to elaborate a little off what you said, right? How this country was founded, right, was already, I'll say biased. I'm not going to use the term racist, not necessarily, but biased, right? And I think instead of addressing that and grabbing the bull by the horns and maybe fixing things, some of these programs and systems have been put in place to try to make up for it, I guess, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
But at some point, I think there needs to be a long, dark look in the mirror, this country, and try to really just sit down and address the root of these things, and see if there's a bigger change that can make a larger impact, I think, instead of just kind of making up that gap of the head start. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's important. You know, Scott made a statement here. Scott Koropkin, he made a statement here. You may actually remember that name, Jason. I'll tell you later. He made a statement and said, way to go. It seems like this is based on economics. They assume that if you're not white, you don't have money, so it can be perceived as racism. So, Scott, I would say that's not a bad statement. I think you're right, because economics plays a huge role in this. And you got to think about, again, it goes back to what people who look like me were brought here for, right? It was economics, textiles, and the fields. And so that's actually one area, right? The economics. I think the racism comes into play, and possibly even classism comes into play, but let's just focus on race, because of the significant association of the colors with the dollar. And the way our people as African Americans may lack knowledge, or may be cornered in a certain environment or certain neighborhood or certain whatever, however way it may be put, it now associates, our minds are associate that color with that. And so I think you're right. Like when I started first off with economics, you're right. But I don't want to take away from the fact that drove a behavior of racism that's unfortunate. I think you made a comment earlier around Jews. And you're right, not every Jew is rich. Like the people make those statements, "Oh, Jews are good with money." I think it's ridiculous. I know plenty of, we make these statements for whatever reason, and then we carry them out. And that's not really safe. But I don't want to discount the fact that racism exists. And maybe, obviously economics is one part of it, but we can't discount the fact that, of course, just based on the color of someone's skin and what we assume and think of that person, it's only about the money. Probably in the context of school, but not, yeah. Thanks, Mike, for clarifying your statement. Overall, any questions? Like, do you have any burning questions for me, Jason? Since we had this open dialogue, and guys, I don't know what he's about to ask me. So, or burning questions, like as a white guy, like if you were going to ask a question to Black America, I mean, what would it be in regards to this? In regards to white.
I got a question. So I know that there are lots of white people in today's kind of social issues that we're dealing with, and a lot of people are wanting to know, hey, me as just one white guy, what is it that I can do that can make an impact? I know I have my opinions, but I think that's a question I would ask of you is, what would you say to not just me, but a white dude that came up to you and said, hey, what actions can I take that can have an impact?
Well, I hope that there's some people who make a comment to that in the state, like ask that question also in the comments, because I think that's going to be huge. And let's all make sure we comment civilly so that way people can learn from it and follow suit. I will say, I would say these type of conversations is huge. Trying to find ways to not be defensive. And I know when you watch the media, not you specifically, but when people watch the media, you probably become defensive. So it probably makes it harder to have these type of conversations. But it's important, and we want to know that we're being heard, I guess, right? Like being understood because that's part of the reason why I started this, is because I want to take the stories away, and we're using social media, but I want to take the stories and the experience of Black America almost away from the news and make it more realistic for people who you relate with all day. I mean, some of us are confused. They're like, oh, white people are this way. But then you're like, well, not that one. He's kind of cool. Well, not that one. She's kind of cool. And it's like, it's because of these relationships we have that probably allow us to kind of say, okay, well, maybe there's some exceptions, but I think just hearing that you're willing to speak in those spaces, like earlier you actually said this, speaking in the spaces we're not, right? That's huge. That's huge. And it's a heavy ask. And then also listening to us and believing us without being defensive. And maybe share an alternative to what we're saying, but after hearing us out. And I don't know what anybody else would say. Let me see. As a white person, I would say, if you hear racism, speak up. That's what Scott said. Christy said, not being afraid to have the uncomfortable conversations with your friends and relatives that have race issues would be awesome. So yeah. So does that help, Jay?
It does, yeah. And I think, not that you asked, I'll give you my perspective on it as well. For me, I have kind of two things, and I know they've already kind of been touched on, but number one is, helping police, right? Self-awareness, and basically if you see something, call it out. Don't just cower and be like, oh man, he shouldn't have treated that guy like that, and walk off. Like, say something, step up, say something, right? Mm-hmm. Have each other's backs, because we should all be Americans and we should all have each other's backs, right? So speak up and say something. And then number two, we already kind of touched on it, but I think educating people, right? Letting them know that this isn't appropriate. This isn't the right way to behave or treat people. And this is an opportunity to change, right? Just kind of educating and pointing opportunities out to people that may not be seeing it, right? Mm. Giving perspective, I guess, is a good way of putting it, right? And I know you and I talk all the time about various issues and things, and we're able to speak candidly, but I think these types of talks are very important, and I think it's important for other people to see and hear that you can have these civil conversations. I'm not saying you can just walk up to anybody on the street. That may not go very well, but
it was like, last thing I need is for somebody to be like, hey, you Negro, let me ask you a question. Like, it's not going to happen. That's not going to fly. I'm just going to be honest with you.
No, but I mean, but if you work with somebody and you're somewhat friendly with them, you don't got to be, best friends or anything, but let's say you work with somebody, go to lunch, just have some conversations.
Yeah.
And you don't have to talk about heavy conversations all the time, but I think, if you're keen to learn and understand, I think your conversation will naturally gravitate there, right? Just like kind of ours does.
Yeah, right? That's true. That's really true.
I'm not saying I call you all the time and be like, hey, let's talk about racism. No, but a lot of times our conversation may gravitate to, a hot topic in our society, and we may talk about it. And I think we learn, you and I, at least I can say, we learn from each other all the time. I know I learn a ton from you. Even if it's just understanding your perspective or how something makes you feel, right? Of something I may not even been thinking about, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. And so let me ask you this on the flip side. Yeah, I agree with you. You got a question for me in that regard? Like the way, I guess my question is the same way. Like you asked, like, what could you do? What about me? What would you think I can do? What do you think I could do? Does that make sense? Is there anything for me to do?
Well, I love what you're doing, and I've told you that you are, and I'm going to speak directly to you, not just any black man that I'm friends with. You have a voice that I think people want to listen to. You want people, and that's why I love that you're doing this, because you have something to say that is relevant, that is intelligent, and can educate people that didn't even realize they needed it. That's what I think is important. There's some people that think they got it all. They're like, I'm not racist, right? That's a common statement. I'm not racist. I got this one black friend, right? Common statement.
Yeah.
Right? But they need to open their eyes and see and hear some of these conversations to hear different perspectives. And, you know, racism in LA is different than racism in New York, which is different than racism in Charlotte, right?
Yeah.
And hearing different people from different areas, different age groups, all these things that you're doing on here, I think are very important because not everyone feels the same way about every single issue, right?
No.
And that's okay. It's okay that they feel different. But it's also important that we understand all of those different perspectives because it'll help us be better human beings, right?
And thank you. I appreciate that. And that's the goal here. And hopefully people can take these conversations in their own sphere of influence, life, family, wherever, and have healthy conversations to help further this cause. And this cause is let's bring it all out in the light and have real conversations about what's going on so we can prevent things like either what happened to George Floyd or any other issues that's occurred before that, warranted or unwarranted, from happening again, because there's a lot of things that didn't go as far as George Floyd that we're carrying. And we just think that maybe if you guys heard us on at least about those things, it would probably be helpful. And across the board, you're right, across the board. So this is huge, man. I don't think there's any more comments. At least I don't think so. So I'm going to wrap it up by saying, Jason, thank you so much. Actually, there was one comment I forgot earlier. There's a guy and I'll wrap this up. Let's wrap it in 5 minutes. I want to get your response, and you're not prepared for this. There was a Christian minister who made a statement and referred to not calling it white privilege and calling it white blessing. That is interesting, but it's definitely not something we would want that to be called. What do you think about that, real quick? And I think you understand why we wouldn't want it to be called white blessing.
No, I mean, if I had to choose between the two, I would choose blessing over privilege, but I'm not saying blessing is the right term either.
Is it because it probably made him feel better? Because of what you said earlier?
Probably, yeah. I mean, there's probably a little guilt maybe associated, like subconsciously, you know what I mean? Because you see, well, I have seen, I'll speak for myself, I see the impacts of white privilege. I've seen it firsthand in some scenarios. And so there's kind of this like subconscious guilt associated with it, right? So when you hear that white privilege, it's like, well, but I didn't ask for it. So I think white advantage has a bit more of a proper term, in my opinion, because it does exist and it's there, but it's not something that I asked for. So advantage kind of is a bit more opportunistic rather than something that you asked for.
Got it. So you wouldn't take blessing just because it's obviously not a very good word to use, but it's not as bad as privilege. So that's why advantage is like yeah, I'm with you on that. That makes sense. I understand. It's tough because trust me, he peeved off a lot of people with that statement. Let's just put it that way. Because to say that you're basically blessed, it's like saying I'm not. And that's, I'm like, come on. Like, really? Like, I'm blessed to wake up every day, you know, and all this other stuff. I get his point, man. So thank you, dude, so much. Guys who joined, you guys are awesome. Thank you for comments. And hopefully those who watch the replay can learn something from it. All right, y'all. Peace.